Welcome back to Season 5 of Legally Uncensored. I'm your host, Demetria Graves, a licensed family law attorney based in California. Our podcast is dedicated to providing essential tools and knowledge for navigating the complexities of family law. We engage in uncensored conversations to shed light on challenging subjects, empowering our listeners with insights for healthier future relationships and proactive divorce strategies. Every season, we strive to offer a deeper approach to divorce, recognizing that legal matters are just one aspect of the journey. This season, we are making sure you understand the basics in the complex world of divorce. Our podcast is your guide to a new beginning and new future. So, thanks for tuning in, and make sure you hit the like button, subscribe, and follow us on all socials. And also, more information is available to you at www.legallyuncensored.com. Now, let's get into it. Today's episode is not only uncensored, but deeply personal as we explore the very, very famous topic in family law, infidelity. Infidelity can cause immense pain, but our guest today offers hope for healing and moving forward. Our guest today is Lisa Brateman, LCSW, a psychotherapist, relationship specialist, speaker, and media commentator based in Manhattan, New York. I'm coming to New York next week, Lisa, FYI. She is a recognized expert in her field and has appeared on numerous media platforms, including CBS, NBC, The New York Times, The Washington Post, and more, sharing her expertise on relationships and healing. Lisa is the author of The Courage to Walk Away, Identifying Toxic Relationships, a book that provides guidance on understanding the healing from infidelity and heartbreak. And Lisa has another book coming out, What Are We Really Fighting About? How to Transform Conflicts into Conversations. Look out for that in September of 2024. So let's get into it. So Lisa, before we get started, and as a divorce attorney, I did find this quite interesting. It just lets me know, in addition to infidelity, there's a lot of things people are fighting over. But for the purpose of this conversation, research does indicate that men continue to cheat more than women. However, when you put the data together, 15 to 20% of married couples cheat. However, which was very surprising to me, the rate of cheating increases with age for both married men and married women. In a study titled America's Generation Gap in Extramarital Affairs, 20% of older couples noted that they have cheated during their marriage. Most people who cheat have been married 20 to 30 years and are between the ages of 50 and 60. More than 50% of cheating spouses, both men and women, have identified that at some point they've confessed their infidelity to their spouses, which is also interesting. Now that we kind of have the statistics and we talked a little bit about who is cheating, I would love to hear from you. So as we get started, I think in today's age, we really need to get down to at least and identify what exactly is infidelity.
Well, in my book, I cover 3 types of infidelity. Mm-hmm. It's sexual, obviously, and that's the one that comes to mind when people hear my title, Healing from Infidelity. They only think it's sexual, but there's a lot more to it than just sexual. That's a big piece of it. But just as painful and hurtful is emotional infidelity as well. Mm-hmm. Whereas you have this deep connection with someone. It could be a coworker, often a coworker, because that's who you spend a lot of time with. And it can happen innocently at first, and the bond builds over time. And then all of a sudden, you don't even realize it's happening, where you tell this person at work the things you're not telling your spouse. Mm. They know more about what's going on in your personal life. First thing Monday morning, they talk about their weekends, but no longer, oh, we went to the game or we did this. It's me and my spouse had a fight, and this is what it's about, and I don't understand. And so that is very painful, even though in those relationships it's not sexual. it's emotional, and that is just as powerful, but in a different way.
Right. You bring up a very important point. You said a lot of infidelity can start in the workplace. Now we all joke around and say work husband, work wife.
Yes.
How can that be different than what we're discussing?
Because that's your go-to person in the office, and they don't know all the things that your husband or wife don't know. They have an inside track on your emotional life, which is very different than, oh, I have to call so and so because we have to go over this project.
Right.
Or they're always there for me, but are they there for you professionally and emotionally, or professionally and, you know, there's a fine line. You don't want to be in the office just professional where you're not a real person besides that. But on the other hand, there is too much. There can be too much
Mm.
that could develop into something deeper.
So do you think it's appropriate to have a work husband or a work wife?
That's a good question, but it depends what it means to you.
Mm-hmm.
If it's your work wife who knows more about you than your real wife, I would question the intensity of that relationship. If it's someone who you can count on in all the ways that you need her professionally, and also you could talk about your kids or your grandchildren or your family in a, you know, not in a why am I still married sort of way.
Right.
There's a line. It's different. Sexual infidelity is so much clearer.
Right. So a lot of times what happened, people call me right when they find out about infidelity. They are upset. They
Hmm.
want a divorce. They're over. But before that even happens, right? Because infidelity can be so heartbreaking and bring so much pain.
Yes.
Between the step of getting upset and calling me and finding out about the infidelity, what advice do you have for those who have just discovered it, um, and they don't know what to do outside of calling divorce attorneys?
Sometimes I used to say this a lot. I try not to anymore, but sometimes a couple or one person of the couple will call me the same day they call a divorce attorney. And
Mm-hmm.
I wish they had come sooner. Not
Mm-hmm.
that I would, not that I could prevent the infidelity, but it's a lot easier to work with a couple who want to stay together earlier on when things are difficult in their marriage, even before that happens. And calling a divorce attorney, that just turns the tide.
Mm-hmm.
That is the scariest thing besides the sentence, we need to talk, is I have a lawyer, you should get one.
Mm-hmm.
And I think any major decision in our lives, any should never be made when you just find out this information. Any big, crazy, chaotic thing going on is not when you make any big decision. You need to sit with it and decide what what steps to take. Because just running to a lawyer first, you might get there anyway,
Mm-hmm.
but at least you can see what's possible before that. I think going to a divorce attorney, you're putting into place what needs to happen on the legal aspect, where
Mm-hmm.
maybe that needs to happen, but maybe not. Maybe it's too soon.
So, for those who are in between stages and are extremely fearful of what to do next,
Mhm.
what do you say to that person that doesn't know what to do? They have this information, they don't know what to do. Call you, call me, put their head in the sand. What do they do?
Well, sometimes one of the partners will call and ask and have an agreement that they'll go to couples therapy if
Mm-hmm.
they both agree. Obviously, more often than not, one person wants to come and the other doesn't. And
Right.
usually the person who doesn't is usually the one who cheated because they feel, hopefully, shame or remorse. And it's really uncomfortable, but yet they don't want to lose their marriage. Just because somebody had an affair does not mean they want to leave their marriage.
Mm.
They just wanted their marriage to be what it was, and they wanted an affair. So they have to come to terms with what is possible. Both parties do. The
Mm.
most difficult thing about that is the trust is broken. There's betrayal, and that takes a long time to process. They go through a lot of different stages: anger, denial, shock, revenge fantasies. That's a big one.
Right.
and they have to deal and take in all that for all those feelings, and they're going to happen not in any given order. But
Right.
sometimes all at the same time, some over, of course, over time.
How do you feel about, because like a divorce attorneys who can really blow up the situation. What about people that automatically call and tell their whole family, right? So then you have all of these opinions
Yeah,
from several different people. How can you really process the trauma you're experiencing with receiving so many
messages.
opinions about the situation?
That happens in most cases. Some people keep it to themselves and suffer silently, but most people will tell their friends, their
Mm-hmm.
parents. And the problem with that is, even if it's not a marriage, even if it's just a breakup, the problem with that is when you tell them when you're angry and you just found out, you're telling them every single thing you've been holding in, even the other things you didn't like. And if
Mm-hmm.
you end up staying together, you have a lot more people in the room than you should ever have. I think it's important that you have a friend that you can talk to, that you trust. I think you need to bounce it off a friend, but it's also important to pick your friend wisely
Oh,
because
yes.
there's too many influences, whether it's your mother, your father saying, you can't leave, you have children, you should stay, and their voices in your head. It's really hard to figure out what is your voice and what you want when there's so many voices in the room.
Right. I think a lot of people don't know what to do. That's why we really love your book, The Courage to Walk Away. And in that, you have a comprehensive guide to understanding and healing from infidelity. So, can you give some of us an insight into specific activities and our exercises and our steps that they can do when this has happened to them?
Well, the first thing, for starters, most people, even if they were suspicious,
Hmm.
they're still in shock because
Right.
suspicion and fact are very different things. So you have it's this is about turning all of those feelings, turning it back to yourself. What Understanding yourself. Yeah, you can have a better understanding of what he or she did and be angry about it and try to find out as much information. But I think when it comes to sexual infidelity, one of the most important things not to do is ask every single question that jumps into your head,
Hmm.
because then when they start asking graphic sexual questions,
Right.
that is not going to help anybody.
Then what do they do with that, right? Because
They didn't know
sometimes,
anything, now they want to know everything.
right,
Because if they feel as if they know more or they know everything, they'll be in more control because they were blindsided. So
right,
that's in a way trying to seek control back.
right.
And one of the most important things to do is, yes, you have to deal with it. Whether it's denial, whether it's anger, you have to deal with that, and that process takes a long time to do. There's one of the things, one of the most important things is something not to do as
Hmm.
opposed to do, and that
Hmm.
is get off social media, stop looking, marriage
Hmm.
breakup, engagement, stop looking at what they're doing, stop looking at their posts, stop looking to see who they like and who they don't like and every single thing about it, because you can't heal when the first thing you do before you have a cup of coffee is check Instagram.
Right. Right.
There's nothing
And
there
don't
you're going to
post about
find.
it.
Right. There's
Right.
nothing you're going to find there that's going to make your day.
Right. And I think our fields are very similar because I tell my clients as well, don't post about it because most people
Right.
are just running to your page now to be nosy or to see what's going on in your personal life, not necessarily that they care. And I know sometimes people can feel that it is an outlet. I just don't think in situations like this it is the best outlet, especially as we go down the line. And so we talked about when it's appropriate to call a lawyer,
Hmm.
but when this is happening, is it appropriate to call? And like you said, sometimes they call you and then me, or me and then you.
Right.
So when is a good time to call you when they're having a hard time dealing with what has happened?
That in that situation, right away, if their
Mm-hmm.
partner is willing to go to therapy, because at least it puts a pause on what happens next.
Mm-hmm.
And therapists will help them see what's possible. Can do both of them want to be in? The most important thing is when I see people in front of me is what do they want for themselves? Are they just coming because they feel they have to, or they're coming because they want to they want to heal, they want to help heal you, they want to stay together. So it depends what their agenda is. Some people come in because their parents highly recommend it. You don't throw a marriage away without going to therapy, even though they don't
Mm-hmm.
believe in, may not believe in therapy.
Right.
So even people who don't believe in therapy believe in marriage therapy.
Right. What about the person that was cheated on that wants to come? When is a good time for them to reach out without their spouse?
Well, sometimes what people do is they'll come in themselves, and maybe after a couple sessions they'll realize as much as they're hurt and feel as if they can never get past this, they're also not willing to give up on the relationship and the marriage and the family that they created. And then that sometimes at that time they will decide to have sessions with their partner, because sometimes right away is so utterly painful they might just need to talk about it with somebody by themselves first.
Have you had a situation where the
Yes,
betrayed party says, you know what, I don't want to do this, but the betrayer is trying to convince them to stay, although they engaged in this act?
absolutely. Oh, that happens a lot of the time because, as I mentioned earlier, just because someone cheated doesn't necessarily mean they wanted to end their relationship. If they wanted to end the relationship, they would have ended their relationship and then met someone.
Mm,
They didn't do anything to end it. So
right.
there's still something there that they want. But yes, that happens a lot. And that goes back to don't make a decision right away, because the person who feels betrayed is going to have to process the feelings of loneliness, betrayal, being lied to. They're going to relive every conversation or every lie they heard. And every
Mm-hmm.
lie they heard was now backed up by 100 other lies
Mm,
that had to protect the first lie.
right.
That takes a long time to process. So
Right.
whether or not they stay together or not, everyone needs to give themselves time to see what happens after those really fierce and strong emotions subside.
Well, as we know, both of us know, a lot of people don't like to go through emotions. People like to go around it, under it, over it.
Mm,
So sometimes that is very challenging. And I know I personally had to learn that myself. A lot of things you have to go through
right.
and not around. And that's can be very challenging. And I'm just curious before we keep going, what are some of the top reasons you see that people engage in infidelity?
The reason top reasons are that their needs aren't being met, whether they're physical, emotional, supportive, empathy. There's many couples after a period of time kind of do what they do. They have their lives. They have their lives together and they have their lives apart. But the apart part gets bigger. Or they
Mm-hmm.
feel like they fight so much so they just stop fighting because they don't want to fight anymore. Their needs aren't being met. They're not being heard or seen. And I think many times that's what kind of makes people more vulnerable
Mm.
to affairs.
So, what do you say to that person that they're not having their needs met? Things are happening and they're thinking about stepping out of their relationship.
The
What
other
should they do before they make that sometimes unforgivable step?
Mhm. I mean, yes, it's unforgivable, but it's often forgiven,
Mm-hmm. Yes.
fortunately.
Yes.
um, when people come to, I love when couples come to couples therapy when things aren't don't feel right, or they feel disconnected, or they feel like they're kind of moving apart from each other, because that is or they're fighting a lot. That is the best time, if there's a best time, to open things up. Why are you unhappy? When I say their needs aren't met, sometimes their needs have been stated and ignored. Sometimes their needs have never been stated because they were fearful to say them. So there's a lot of uncovering to do there. And not to say your spouse has to be everything for you. We have friends, we have family, we have colleagues. Your spouse should not provide all of your life emotional needs. Hopefully your sexual ones, but not necessarily all the other ones.
Mm,
So I think it's also important to balance it. Like, are you expecting your partner to give you 90% of what you need in the world?
mm,
And sometimes people say, yeah, they're my everything, they're my person. But sometimes it's a burden on a relationship when the expectations are not realistic also.
right.
So sometimes I kind of help break that down of what is possible. If your partner's not good in a certain way or just like doesn't show up in a certain way, you can teach them, you can tell them, but if they're doing their best on it, that counts. They can't always say and do the things the way you want them to. They can't read your mind.
Right. So, along those lines, what is the best role of a psychotherapist in helping people stay together and navigate infidelity when the
Listen,
relationship is now completely fractured?
right. This it may sound it's the simplest answer, but it's listening to each other. Somewhere along the line, they stop paying attention. They stop listening. They never, you know, they nod, they but they're not present. Listening and being present is the biggest compliment you can give. Is the way to show that you care is that you want to know how they feel. Asking questions, be curious. I think after a while people think, oh, I've been together all this time, I know everything about them. You don't. You know everything about them up till then, maybe.
Mm,
But something, you're both together and years have gone by. There are other things there. So I think sometimes the lack of curiosity is what gets them um, derailed too.
Has there ever been a situation where you met with the couple and you said, you know what, this is probably not going to work out, and help them amicably prepare for a divorce?
Yes, yes. There are some situations that no matter what they think they want, they can't have with each other, or it's toxic for each other, and they can love each other, but it's not meant to last forever because they're unhappy. So yes, that absolutely does happen, and that's when but they have to come to that conclusion, and they do.
And then I would say, after you have spoken to Lisa, then you call me after you have all made that decision. I have a couple of listener questions for you.
Sure.
So, one person says, I'm aware of my husband cheating. However, he does not want to divorce, and I am not in a financial position to leave. How do I protect my mental health?
Preparing There's a separation right there because it sounds like she wants to leave but she can't, and that's not terribly uncommon. That has been,
Right.
unfortunately, historically, that has been the situation, and even though it exists less today, it's still a piece of it. It's still prevalent. My, I think in that situation is you need to make a plan. You may not be able to leave right now, but you can detach emotionally. You can change the course of your marriage. You can build a different life for yourself within that construct. You could also make a plan on how you can leave. It doesn't have to be today, but it could be in 2 years after you go back to school or take a training. How do you support yourself? I think he may not want to leave, but you have to bring it back to yourself. What can I do for me that will give me the things that I want? And it doesn't, like I said, it could be through education, it could be through different support, it could be a lot of different things, but don't just accept that you can't leave. You can accept that for today, but I wouldn't accept that for your future.
Right. Well, thank you for that. So, another question I get a lot of times, Lisa, is I don't know if he's cheating or if she's cheating or if they're cheating, but I feel it. It's my intuition and it's making me extremely suspicious. But they don't want to cause problems with their spouse because there's no evidence of that. How does one navigate the strong feelings that they have about it and kind of protect their self-esteem without causing what can be unnecessary conflict?
Many times people instinct, they go with their instinct, and I think that's a great way of putting it, because we're always told, trust your instinct, trust your instinct. I think we've been brought up that way. But as good as that is, and I think trusting your instinct is important, sometimes your instinct is distorted by fear. And I think it's important, especially if there's no evidence of it, to ask yourself, the question is, did this happen to you before? Are you being triggered because you've had this experience? Or did this happen to one of your parents or your best friend? Are you now prone to look for something that may or may not be there because you're trying to protect yourself? But the question is, what are you protecting yourself from? You could be right, you could be wrong, but if you don't really know, you could also just ask your partner and say, I don't have anything to base this on, but I have this feeling. You can ask for reassurance, and it doesn't have to be a conflict. You can just blame it on yourself since there's no proof. Like, I wouldn't accuse somebody because your instinct says so. But I think in a relationship, you have to be able to say, I'm feeling a little insecure about something. But one of the first things I would look at is, was there something that triggered that? Were you at a party and he or she was dancing with somebody else and it looked really intimate? Is it based on something real, or is it based on something imagined?
That is so powerful. And and a great way to lead us into our closing. That was very powerful because a lot of people have such strong suspicions, but nothing is happening. So I really, really appreciate that. That was very powerful. So in today's episode of Legally Uncensored, we explored essential points today about infidelity and dealing with infidelity. Some common known things we all know about infidelity, and some powerful insights that Lisa was so graceful to share with us today. So I want to express my deepest gratitude to you, Lisa, for coming on and sharing your expertise and wisdom. I can really sit here and talk about this all day, so I really appreciate you. And as we all know, healing is really a journey, and it's okay to seek support along the way. If you're struggling with infidelity in your relationship, as we learned, there are resources out there for you. Lisa in her book that you can get, and her book that's coming out in September in 2024. You are not alone, and there are resources available, as I stated, to help you navigate that time. And I don't believe I'm saying this, but it's true. As a divorce attorney, I'm not always the answer, believe it or not. So thank you so much for tuning in to this episode of Legally Uncensored. Be sure to subscribe to our podcast and follow us on all social media platforms as we continue to have these wonderful discussions. So until next time, I'm Demetria Graves.